Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, accompanied by the Vice President of the United States and Miss Michelle Duster.
Right. It's the law.
Okay, yay.
Yes, sir.
I met him once or twice.
And thank you for looking to the peer rate.
Yep.
That's very important to me.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. A little unusual to do the bill signing, not say anything and then speak, but that's how we set it up. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I just signed into law the Emmett Till Antilynching Act, making lynching a federal hate crime for the first time in American history. I want to thank Vice President Harris, who was a key co-sponsor of this bill when she was a United States Senator. And I also want to thank Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer and members of the Congress here today, especially Congressman Hoyer, Bobby Rush, Senator Dick Durbin, and Cory Booker. I also want to thank Senator Tim Scott, who couldn't be here today, and the civil rights leaders gathered here today, and most of all, the family of Emmett Till and Ida B. Wells. Thank you for never giving up, never, ever giving up. Matter of fact, granddaughter told me that her mother was here when? And your grandmother was here when? In 1898, in order to make a case for the anti-lynching law. It was over 100 years ago, in 1900, a North Carolina representative named George Henry White, the son of a slave, the only black lawmaker in Congress at the time, who first introduced legislation to make lynching a federal crime. Hundreds of similar bills have failed to pass. Over the years, several federal hate crime laws were enacted, including one I signed last year to combat COVID-19 hate crimes. But no federal law expressly prohibited lynching, none, until today. One of the leading chronicles of our history of the lynching is Brian Stevenson, who happens to be a Delawarean from our home state, who wanted very much to be here today, but he could not. He helped build a National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, America's first site dedicated to understanding the legacy of lynching. You know, his extensive research showed that between 1877 and 1950, more than 4,400 black people were murdered by lynching, most in the South, but some in the North as well. That's a lot of folks, man, and a lot of silence for a long time. Lynching was pure terror. to enforce the lie that not everyone belongs in America, not everyone is created equal. Terror to systematically undermine hard-fought civil rights. Terror, not just in the dark of the night, but in broad daylight. Innocent men, women, and children hung by nooses from trees, bodies burned and drowned and castrated. Their crimes? Trying to vote, trying to go to school, trying to own a business or preach the gospel. False accusations of murder, arson, and robbery. Simply being black. Often the crowds of white families gathered to celebrate the spectacle, taking pictures of the bodies and mailing them as postcards. Emmett Till was an only child. He grew up in the south side of Chicago with his mother Mamie and grandparents and cousins. In the summer of 1955, Emmett turned 14 years old, ready to start 8th grade in the fall. Before school started, he wanted to visit his cousins in Mississippi. So Emmett's mom dropped him off at the train station in Chicago. Her own family fled the Delta decades earlier. So she told him the unwritten rules she had to follow. Quote, "Be very careful how you speak. Say yes, sir, and no, ma'am. And do not hesitate to humble yourself if you have to get down on your knees." End of quote. That same speech, that same admonition, too many black parents today still have to use that admonition. They have to tell their children when it comes to encounters with the law enforcement, you know, and so many other circumstances. She kissed Emmett goodbye. It was the last time she saw her son alive. Days after he arrived in Mississippi, Emmett's mutilated body was found in a river. Barbed wire tied around his neck and a 75-pound cotton gin fan attached to that wire as he was thrown into the river. Emmett's mother, his mother, demanded that her son be sent home so that his funeral in Chicago could be an open casket. Here's what she said: "Let the people see what I've seen." America and the world saw what she saw. Emmett Till was born nearly 40 years ago, after the first anti-lynching law was introduced. Although he was one of thousands who were lynched, his mother's courage to show the world what was done to him energized the civil rights movement. Exactly 100 days later, Rosa Parks was arrested on the bus in Montgomery. Her statue sits in my office. She said, "I thought of Emmett Till and I couldn't go back. I thought of Emmett Till and I couldn't go back." Dr. King often preached about, quote, "the crying voices of little Emmett Till screaming from the rushes of the Mississippi." To the Till family, we remain in awe of your courage to find purpose through your pain, to find purpose through your pain. But the law is not just about the past. It's about the present and our future as well. From the bullets in the back of Ahmaud Arbery to countless other acts of violence, countless victims known and unknown. The same racial hatred that drove the mob to hang a noose brought that mob carrying torches out of the fields of Charlottesville just a few years ago. Racial hate isn't an old problem. It's a persistent problem, a persistent problem. And I know many of the civil rights leaders here know, you heard me say it 100 times. Hate never goes away. It only hides. It hides under the rocks. Given just a little bit of oxygen, it comes roaring back out, screaming. But what stops it is all of us, not a few. All of us have to stop it. People like Ida B. Wells, one of the founders of the NAACP, established 100 years ago in response to racial terror across the country. A brilliant, gifted writer. She exposed the barbaric nature of lynching as a tool to intimidate and subjugate black Americans. In her words, her courage, her convictions, She was trying to prevent the murders of Emmett Till and Ahmaud Arbery. So many others, over 4,400 others. Ida B. Wells once said, quote, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon the wrongs." Turn the light of truth upon the wrongs. That's what all of you have done gathered in this rose garden with this bill and so much more, including Ida B. Wells' great-granddaughter, Michelle Duster, whom I'm honored to introduce to mark this historic day. Michelle, welcome to the White House and welcome to the podium. As my mother would say, God love you, dear. All right. I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
I'm going to just take a moment to take in this because it has been a very long time. Thank you, President Biden, for that introduction and for your leadership in signing this bill into law. My brother Dan and I are honored to be here and represent our great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells Barnett, who once said, "Our country's national crime is lynching." She was born enslaved in 1862, Holly Springs, Mississippi, the same state where 14-year-old Emmett Till was lynched 93 years later. She became one of the first investigative and most prominent journalists and civil rights activists of her time. She carefully chronicled names, dates, locations, and excuses used to justify lynchings. She wrote articles and pamphlets and gave speeches about the atrocities. And it was personal to her because 3 of her enterprising friends, Thomas Moss, Will Stewart, and Calvin McDowell, who co-owned a grocery store in Memphis, were lynched in 1892. She knew these upstanding men who were leaders in the community. They were guilty of no crime. Through her writing and speaking, she exposed uncomfortable truths that upset the status quo. Truths that lynching was being used as an excuse to terrorize the Black community in order to maintain a social and economic hierarchy based on race. And for that, her life was threatened, her printing press was destroyed, and she was exiled from the South. Despite losing everything, she continued to speak out across this country and Great Britain about the violence and terror of lynching. She eventually settled in Chicago, where I was born, and where Emmett Till was born. And in 1898, in response to the lynching of Postmaster Fraser Baker in Lake City, South Carolina, she visited President William S. McKinley right here in Washington to urge him to make lynching a federal crime. Since my great-grandmother's visit to the White House 124 years ago, there have been over 200 attempts to get legislation enacted. And 17 years ago, in 2005, my brother Dan spoke at the Senate press conference where they issued an apology for not passing the legislation. But we finally stand here today, generations later, to witness this historic moment of President Biden signing the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill into law. We are here today because of the tenacity of the civil rights leaders and commitment of members of Congress who are here today. And because of someone who was instrumental in this bill when she was a senator, and someone my great-grandmother would especially be proud of. It is my humble honor to introduce the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris.
Good job.
All good. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Michelle, thank you for your powerful words. I was so glad that we had some time in the Oval Office with the President to talk with you about the historic day that we are celebrating, but on the shoulders of so many, including your family and you who have written about it, maintaining your family's legacy of speaking truth always. So thank you. It's good to see everybody. President Biden, members of Congress, I have to shout out to the CBC, to my fellow Americans, thank you all. So lynching, well, we know it's a stain on the history of our nation. Since our founding, and in particular, in the century following the Civil War, thousands of people in states across our nation were tortured and murdered by vigilantes. They were dragged from their homes. They had ropes wrapped around their necks. They were hanged, burned, drowned, and dismembered. Often, as the President said, as their families were forced to watch, and as crowds gathered to spectate. These lynchings were motivated, of course, by racism and meant to cause terror. They were acts committed to secure political and social control. But they were not designated crimes by the federal government. Lynching was not considered a crime by the federal government. Legislation to make lynching a federal crime was first introduced in the United States Congress in the year 1900. It failed. In the 122 years since, anti-lynching legislation has been introduced to the United States Congress more than 200 times, advanced by leaders such as James Weldon Johnson of the NAACP, and of course, the phenomenal Ida B. Wells. Those who courageously knew what had to be done and were undeterred. And when we speak of Ida B. Wells, let's understand the courageous nature of that incredible American who used her skill, her profession, her calling as a journalist, as President Biden noted, to help open the eyes of our nation to the terror of lynching, which speaks, of course, to the role that we have known also historically. I'm going off script for a moment, about the importance of the black press and the importance of making sure that we have the storytellers always in our community who we will support to tell the truth when no one else is willing to tell it. And so those heroes who petitioned every president from McKinley to Hoover to support federal legislation. Anti-lynching legislation was introduced in the wake of some of these most brutal attacks. After the murder of Mary Turner in 1918, after the murder of Emmett Till in 1955, and James Byrd Jr. in 1998, and James Craig Anderson in 2011. And it failed again and again. And again and again, anti-lynching legislation was reintroduced in the United States Congress by leaders who understood that our past must not and cannot be forgotten, that the truth must be spoken no matter how difficult it is to speak, and certainly no matter how difficult it is to hear. Leaders who understood that the victims of lynching and their families and all of our society deserve that we recognize the crimes and the injustice of what was occurring, and that the people of our nation deserve the protection of a federal anti-lynching law. When I served in the United States Senate, it was a profound honor to sponsor, with Cory Booker, the Emmett Till Antilynching Act. And I want to say a thing about Cory Booker. I'm going to talk about him in front of his face. Cory Booker, I have had the privilege of working with, and he is a man of uncommon courage, unmatched moral clarity, and an unwavering commitment to doing what is right. Thank you, Cory Booker. And I also want to recognize and thank Senator Tim Scott, whose partnership, of course, helped us pass this legislation, and with Congressman Bobby Rush. Where is he? There you are. Who kept this fight alive for so many years in the United States Congress. Congressman Rush, you have dedicated your career to guiding our nation toward justice, and I thank you. And thank you to so many other leaders who are gathered here who helped us reach this very important day. Leaders who witnessed the brutal reality of lynching, such as Ollie Gordon and Reverend Wheeler Parker, cousins of Emmett Till, for whom the stories of these crimes are not lines in a history book, but vivid memories. So today we are gathered to do unfinished business, to acknowledge the horror in this part of our history, to state unequivocally that lynching is and has always been a hate crime, and to make clear that the federal government may now prosecute these crimes as such. Lynching is not a relic of the past. Racial acts of terror still occur in our nation. And when they do, we must all have the courage to name them and hold the perpetrators to account. And with that, I'll close by saying this. I believe that so often, and it has been said, the victims of lynching were targeted. And let's be clear about this, because they were working to build a better America. That's what they were doing. It was in everybody's best interest what they were doing. But unfortunately, the cowards couldn't see, didn't understand. Those folks who were killed, they were business owners, creating economic opportunity in their community by which all would prosper and benefit. They were teachers, educating the next generation of America's leaders. They were activists who were defending the sacred freedom to vote. So today, as we recognize them, as we recognize our history, let us also be here gathered to recommit ourselves to that unfinished business as well, to continuing to fight for freedom, for opportunity, and justice for all. May God bless you, and may God bless America. Thank you all.
Great job.
Thank you.
All the cabinet members, please stand. And the second gentleman of the United States of America, who, like me, married way up. And all the members of the House and Senate, please stand. All right. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, very much. This is as someone once said, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate it all. Thank you. Well, come on over here and get it. There you go.